Trustee Hallwax, Trustee Listener, Trustee Mulvaney, Trustee Onderdunk, Trustee Rubin, Trustee Vree,
Here.
President Rowan.
Here.
We have a quorum.
We have a quorum barely, but we have one. And other folks are coming with the exception of Trustee Rubin, who's out of town. We're live streaming this meeting and have posted the links to the live stream on the village's social media pages. We'll make the recording available on the village's YouTube channel following the conclusion of tonight's meeting. First, after the roll call, the first item is public comment. This portion of the meeting allows for those in attendance to address the board regarding non-agenda items, and I'll request public comments that relate to agenda items when we get to that item on the agenda. All comments will be limited to 3 minutes, and we'll be watching the time. Any public comments on non-agenda items? I don't see any, so that takes us to the next item on the agenda, which is an update on issues related to residential construction. And I will ask our Development Services Manager, Taylor Baxter, to present. Taylor.
Thank you, President Rowan. So this is an update to a conversation that we started last summer in response to some ongoing issues that we were having with residential construction sites throughout the village that were leading to a lot of feedback from neighbors. Those included particularly work hour violations, ongoing issues, especially with particular builders for building both before and after allowable work hours. Another big one was parking and interference with traffic, trucks parking too close to driveways, parks taking up entire streets, making it impossible or very difficult to navigate residential streets on a regular basis. General site conditions, whether they be a lack of maintenance, site fencing down, screening down, fencing and sidewalk blockages, etc. Permits taking years to complete. That was one that is really concentrated on a few specific sites, but we had a few sites that were taking years and years, 3-5 years to complete. And then just general neighbor relations, communication with neighbors, people feeling like they might not know when construction projects are coming or who they should contact. So in the last year, we've tried to address these to the extent that we can. A few steps we've taken since last summer. We've started sending out letters, pre-construction letters to neighbors of major construction sites, typically new houses or projects that we think are going to take months and months and months and cause a significant impact on neighbors. We send out these letters when we issue permits. They include contact info for village staff, including some information on what the work hours are, what they should do if they see work hour violations or other violations, who they should contact. And we also have a builder contact on there. We reach out to the builders beforehand and say who's the best person for neighbors to contact if they have concerns. And so those are on there as well. So anytime you have a new house now, right when the permit's issued, everyone that we feel is within a vicinity that would likely be impacted, whether it's behind the site or along the same street, will get one of these in the mail. Improve pre-construction communication with builders about village expectations. This is typically verbal, talking to, or by email, talking to builders, especially the builders that we've had complaints about, talking to them about what our expectations are as far as where trucks are going to be going, where people will be parking, especially letting them know about a zero tolerance approach to work hours, especially because that really was one of the main issues that we've been hearing again and again. Again, with work hours violations, prior to last summer, it was a bit of by committee approach, where different people would, public safety and public works, would have some overlapping responsibilities there. We've really tried to standardize that process so that it's so that things don't fall through the cracks, so that people know who to call, and we can make sure that fines are issued and that we can put a stop to it the first time it happens and issue escalating fines if it continues to happen. So we instruct everyone with work hours violations, typically because they're not during typical office hours, to reach out directly to public safety. We've coordinated with public safety so that public safety will go out, they'll document the violations. We ask neighbors to, if they can, they don't have to, but We tell them it helps us to have evidence. If they can take pictures or even videos of work hours violations, send them to us. So this really starts with public safety, and then public safety, at this point, sends those reports to me directly, and I will let the builder know that there's a fine issued. We don't give warnings for work hours violations. We issue a fine the first time, and then we escalate the fine amount if there are multiple violations. We haven't gotten to the point yet in the last year of issuing stop work orders for work hours violations. We have had a couple sites where we've had multiple violations, but I would say that since we have standardized the system a bit, and especially since we've cracked down on a small number of builders, we have seen a reduction in the number of work hours violation complaints that we get. It's not zero, but I have seen a substantial reduction this summer compared to last summer. And I think that that's really the result of a small number of builders that were causing us the biggest number of issues. Increasing unscheduled code enforcement site visits. We've got our building official now who typically is doing scheduled inspections on Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. Whenever possible, he'll also take extra time now to visit construction sites, do rounds of the city, unscheduled, where he's going around looking at construction sites, looking for site maintenance issues, looking for parking violations, people parked on the sidewalk, people parked in the parkways, etc. That's really been stepped up in the last year. We've tried to standardize that process as well, where he sees those violations, he gets the evidence, takes pictures, takes videos, a description of time, he sends those directly to me. I reach out directly to builders for our typical violations, such as, let's say, someone parked on the sidewalk or site fencing down. We typically issue one warning where we say, this is your one warning here, this is not allowed. Here's a photo of the violation. If this happens again, we're going to issue a fine. We issue a fine if it happens again, and then it escalates from there. Typically, it doesn't escalate beyond a warning. It does occasionally. In the last year, it's been very rare where we've had to issue multiple fines for the same violation. A small handful of sites. You all are aware of the code amendment that we passed earlier this year to substantially increase the cost to builders for going over the 15-month permit time frame, where we substantially increased those costs. We have not yet been 15 months out from that. That increase only applies to permits that were issued after that date, which I believe was in February of this year. So we've not yet seen that in effect. Hopefully in the next year or so, we will see that it's even on larger construction sites that's really speeding people up. But we don't quite have the evidence for that yet. I would say going forward, we're currently in the final stages of implementing our new permitting software, which includes code enforcement, which should make all of this administration significantly more organized and hopefully really help us improve our code enforcement capabilities with the ability to see to more easily compile such things as where are we seeing repeat violations, what types of complaints are we getting, create more detailed and more specific reports on those kinds of things. So I'm hoping in the next year or so we'll even be able to improve on where we are today with our code enforcement administration. And with that, I will turn it back over to the board. That's correct. Absolutely understood. That is something I'd probably want to talk through with the village attorney, but it's something we can look more closely at.
Or if not, making it so the homeowner has to, or so the contractor has to, but at least notifying the homeowner so they're
Right.
aware if they're having costs passed through.
Absolutely. Or it's something that we can make sure that if we have an owner contact, which we should have on our application, that they're CC'd on we're issuing a $250 fine. We send that to a GC. We also CC the homeowner on there. I think that's something that we can make sure we do.
Another thing, again, I don't know what can improve on it. We have citizens.
Absolutely.
I expect that our contractors are all licensed, is that correct?
When required to be, yes, that's correct.
That may be a lever that we would have in the future to have our legal people take a look at if it were a reoccurring problem. Thank you.
The board will, as I said, I can probably sort of, is there anyone from the audience who would like to do so? I see one, and we're not going to hold it against you.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
We're like 50 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President and the board. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. This microphone's going to fall out of here. If I can, I just reinforce a couple of the points that were made there and maybe expand on a few. I would love to see the opportunity to have the contractor information posted permanently on the building sites themselves, so that in the case where residents are having these recurrent problems, they can contact the contractor and at least offer a complaint directly to the contractor. In our case, we weren't able to talk to anybody on any consistent basis there. I'd also add that I think the code enforcement particularly is an area where I assume you all remember my letter from last summer, and I appreciate you taking the time to look at that. But I think code enforcement is an area that I would give as much consideration as possible. The staff, in our experience, was unbelievably diligent, way above and beyond the call. Public safety as well. Having said that, it felt last year in particular like staff were stuck with an enforcement capability that was relatively minor. Builders were just incorporating the fines as cost of doing business, as opposed to really having some issue regarding the fines themselves. I would recommend that for the recidivists for the multiple violations, that you consider either pulling the license for the contractor themselves or doing earlier stop orders, like having a policy scripted out so contractors can see if I have more than 5 code violations within a 14-day period, that I'm going to get a stop order on that, and the stop order will be X amount of time. I would really strongly recommend the board look at some sort of resolution like that. As it is, in my understanding, in Glencoe, if a restaurant, for example, had 3 health code violations, the license would be pulled without a question. There's not even it's like, well, of course. But code violations with builders can become multiple. I mean, tens and then dozens of code violations, and it's just, even with the increased fines, it's just a cost of doing business with them. Finally, I would also add to you that while we see this in black and white as a very logical extension, I would emphasize that many of these code violations, if not most of them, are purposeful. People are working past time. They know that they're working past this time. They know that there's machinery on. It isn't like they're trying to hide this. And that level of kind of, again, if we were to use another example of people riding bikes down the middle of Green Bay Road and just like, well, that's what I'm going to do, the board would take action on that immediately. These are purposeful violations that are done repeatedly with the idea of their own motivations in mind. Finally, and thank you again for the time, I would also ask for, if it's possible, to do a brief review of the RC District Code relative to the setback. As it is right now, builders can, they're prohibited from building into the setback, that 8-foot setback in the RC District. Is it 8 feet? I think it's 8 feet, yeah. But they can build egress windows and walls into that setback area in the area of Glencoe where that land is most precious. As it's written now, in my view, pardon me, as it's written now, in my view, it makes it almost an incentive for builders to build into those areas, because those are areas that you can't do anything else with them, so that's where the egress windows are put and the walls are put. So I would recommend that staff do a review of that and see if there's a condition that could be put upon a building permit to say egress windows and walls can be put in there, but only if you show us a reason why they have to be put in there. There's many instances where you could see egress windows that could be in a backyard instead of the setback, but it makes more sense for people to put it in the setback because it's not going to be used for anything else. So I would ask for maybe a staff to do a little bit of review on that, maybe do an engineering review with it and see if that has any traction at all. I assume it doesn't, but I just thought I'd offer the idea as well. Finally, just a review. I would very much encourage the board to really reconsider that enforcement code. I think that's the key to reining in these issues and making the builders as responsible as the other businesses in town. Finally, I apologize. I do believe, for example, that the homeowner may have responsibility at some point. If there's enough code violations, I think the homeowner should be as liable as anyone else. They are the one contracting this person or these people. And I could foresee a time when it gets to some measure and the fine goes to the homeowner now, in addition to the builder as well. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. I certainly appreciate the opportunity. And may I say as well, I very much want to appreciate Dave Mao and our great village manager here, Phil, because you guys have been very patient with me. And my many communications that I've done have been very well received, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you. Thank you.
We never saw what the escalating fines or when foreclosure stoppages would happen, did we?
No, the building code related fines and construction related fines are very discretionary. They are anywhere between it's either $25 or $50 and $750 a day. So it really varies on the severity of the fine. Is it a repeat violation? For example, for a work hours violation, typically no warning will issue a $200 fine. The second time will probably double that. If it was, I don't think we've had a third violator for work hour fines in the last, I'm not even sure when. At that point, you probably go straight to $750 or a stop work order. We have had some repeat violators for certain things. Like, for example, someone had, we had a builder who on 2 separate occasions has had some coloration for driveways go onto neighboring property. We issued a fine, and I told that builder, if this happens anywhere else in the village, we will go straight to $750. There's not going to be we're not going to start at $200 and go up from there. For something smaller, like I don't know, your construction fence gate is swung out and it's blocking the sidewalk when our inspector drives by. You know, it's something that's not allowed. You can't be blocking the sidewalk for any reason, really. That's likely something we do. You know, a $75, $100 fine. We'd probably issue a warning first for that. Say you can't be blocking the sidewalk. You know, make sure that you don't have your fence swung out. If we see it again, a smaller fine, and we'll increase from there, up to $750 a day.
Do you like having discretion, or would it be helpful to say after so many code violations, this is not working?
We could go either way. I mean, if you all wanted to make that more standardized, I wouldn't be against it necessarily. It would be something that would have to be continually updated probably. We'd have to look at it regularly and say, if we have it in our fee and fine schedule that, let's say, blocking the sidewalk is a $100 fine. we'd have to look at that every couple years, most likely. Make sure that it's keeping up with, the cost of doing business.
I would say we may, if the board has an interest in there being, perhaps there's a hybrid version where there is still discretion from a fine standpoint, but if there's a threshold that they hit that triggers a stop work order, that could be codified. It's similar to what Mr. Keefe had
Certainly.
suggested. We don't have that right
We don't.
now. I don't know that that would necessarily be a limiting factor from a stop work order perspective, because I think we'd want to maintain some level of discretion to shut down a work site even if they hadn't hit a certain number of violations because of the severity of a single violation. But it could be, if we could try to classify certain violations, and if you hit let's just say 5, you have a stop work order issued for a day. If you hit 7, that you get another one for 2 days, something like that. We can certainly look into that and come back to the board with concepts.
Whether there is a thing, as a rule, I don't love this gambler stuff, it's not what we do necessarily. Soft and hard. On the other hand, let's see, we're not the first village that's looking in place, what are the choices? Mandatory
We certainly, I think that there is flexibility, so we can look and see and get some information back to the board in terms of what other communities do, but I don't know that we're limited by that. It really is more discretionary from the board standpoint. What we are limited by is the maximum fine. We are capped at $750, so we can't raise that. No, I don't think that's.
That's in our fee and fine schedule. We could run it by the village attorney, but
It's also, it's
Is
a
it
state
state? Okay.
statute, if I remember correctly, and I believe that it supersedes home rule authority.
I had 2 quick comments. I totally trust the discretion of the staff and don't want to interfere with that. But I think it's very important that we have consistency. We don't want to be in a case where we're accused of a bias of one developer over another. So if there's a way to find that balance of discretion and what's reasonable, but also, gosh, we got to be careful to be consistent in how we apply that discretion.
They both have done the same thing. If this guy has a ratchet on he gets to collect.
Yep.
not really, no, we have not.
I think the more it's just, having a stop work order, is there some, I don't feel good about doing this, and we just want to make sure that you're not worried about, this is what you're supposed to do. That's my thinking. It's not more to take away discretion, it's just to give you the support that if you have to take a larger action, you feel comfortable doing it.
Just one more point. Sorry. I would offer to the board that creating the hybrid may provide sustenance to homeowners in the area of the construction that are not maybe directly involved with the construction itself, knowing that there's that backstop there, that they can say, well, look, this is what's happening and this is how many times it's happened. So it would give, I think, a sense of confidence that the discretion could still be used to a degree, but then there is a backstop to it at some point, and then neighbors would be able to say, well, okay, it's going to hit sometime. Thank you. I appreciate that.
There was a second point I wanted to make, and that was about safety. So with this notion of discretion, you were talking about triggers and thresholds. I don't know what our code says, but it's pretty typical for safety violations, automatic, mandatory. It's not discretion. If there's a safety violation, you shut it down, period. Right? And anybody should have that authority, whether you're on the site as a contracted worker. If you feel unsafe, we should make sure that Glencoe allows our construction workers to stop a construction project if they feel they're being in an unsafe situation, as well as our staff. So I don't know how that reads in our code, but safety to me is a zero threshold.
Yeah, we have the ability to shut anything down, and frankly, OSHA becomes a factor if we're talking, if you're talking about the contractor's employees, they would have the ability to be involved as well, so.
Taylor, have we had, you know, OSHA-type safety violations with contractors in town?
I can think of one in almost 3 years.
Very infrequent.
By the way, the same goes for Public Works.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else? Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Taylor. The next item on our agenda is a staff report discussion on water system topics and issues. I'll ask our public works director, Dave Howe, to present. Hot mic control. Put that in.
Quick feedback.
All right, thank you. Good evening, members of the board. As indicated, I'm joined tonight by our Public Works General Superintendent Don Kirk and our Water Plant Superintendent Alex Urbanzik to have a discussion with you on a couple of different topics that are water system related. The first of which is a follow-up on a conversation we had in May with the board on lead service line replacement. There's some juggling here. Okay. Okay, there we go. So, if you recall, we outlined for the board in the spring the passage of the Lead Service Replacement Act last year, and the requirements that imposed on water utilities throughout the state of Illinois. In very simple terms, some steps that had to be taken. One is an inventory of all the current existing or suspected lead service lines within the utility system, development of a plan that's submitted to the IEPA annually on how the water utility intends to address the replacement of those lead service lines. And then based on the inventory total, there was imposed deadlines, and for Glencoe, based on the 500 plus lead service lines that we believe remain in our system, the village has until 2042 to see that all those known or suspected lead service lines in the community are replaced. Again, just by way of quick review, in the village code, the water service line, and when we talk about the water service line, that is the small diameter pipe that connects each and every meter and home to the village's water distribution system. So we're talking about everything from the connection out at the water main to the meter inside the home. That is what we call the lead service, or the water service line. So by code in Glencoe, that entire service line is a private responsibility. That is probably, we're probably in the strong minority of communities that have that code provision. Most, that the break between public and private is at or near the property line or the right-of-way line or the B box, the shut-off valve that's the inline valve that's on that service line. So in Glencoe, by code, historically, and this is the way we've operated our utilities for as long as our code's been in place, that the entire service line is private. So we have lead service lines is not a new phenomenon. We've been dealing with these, as we touched on in the spring. They've existed for decades within systems. They've stopped being new lead service lines stopped being put in place in the 50s and 60s. The village has, anytime we've encountered private lead service lines for the last 25 years, has informally developed a program to encourage their full replacement. The problem when a lead service line is impacted, whether it's with a leak on their side or a public improvement, is that service line, that line is disturbed, and so all the leachate from the lead is disturbed in the line, and that kind of accelerates the concentration of lead. Again, as we said in May, there was no known lead source within the village's public system. The lead source is in these lead service lines and in some of the internal plumbing in some of the older homes in town. And I've got subject matter experts here to help with our discussion on that tonight. But we have, I think, fairly successfully and probably have knocked out 150 or 200 lead service lines in the last 25 years, either through the village's scheduled water main replacement program or privately pursued repairs on these lines, either precipitated by a leak on the line, which is most often the case. Far less often, understandably, is somebody just voluntarily replacing their lead service line because they've which we, again, strongly encourage. They've done their homework and understand the potential health risks that presents to certain subject matters within the users of those utilities, namely the elderly or the young. And so, what we wanted to circle back for tonight is to begin to talk about, when we last talked in May, we were still hopeful of a water main improvement program this year that was going to include 3 residential main sections, of which we only had I think we only had 2 lead service lines within those 3 water mains. As you know, we've deferred that work because of bid pricing, so we will not address any of those. We will not address those 2 lead service lines this year as part of our program. But we know going forward, probably a third of those 500 plus remaining lead service lines, we will address those with the scheduled water main replacements that we have in the next 15 years, and we will have, that our water main replacement CIP program will expand as our rolling 10-year plan, CIP plan gets updated. So we're confident that many of these will get addressed through our water main program. Also, there'll be a fair number of these through the attrition, through development, residential development, redevelopment of property, new homes torn down and new home gets constructed. They're putting in an all-new copper service that's by practice. So we've had a fair number of those lead service lines replaced through that purpose over the last 20 years. But as we begin to start to shape what we think might be a policy going forward, we think in the interest of fairness and equity, we have for as far back as staff can look, we have, as a matter of policy, when we've replaced water main, we replace the service line, the private service line, up to the B box as part of the improvement. So that's not at the cost of the resident. Has not been at the cost of the resident. Where a lead service is involved, as I indicated, we've encouraged through through good education material and the staff that works on the front lines with residents. We've strongly encouraged, and we've had a fair number that have then taken the opportunity to replace the balance of the service at their expense. So that being the case, going forward, we think that probably needs to shape our policy for what, if any, share of this cost the village is going to take on. So there's really, and I laid these out in the write-up, kind of questions for consideration. There's really three areas that we need to kind of focus on. One are those scheduled water main improvements, where we have, in effect, general purposes, we're replacing half of that service line as part of our scheduled water main replacement. So there's a contribution there to what would otherwise be a private expense. So lead service lines that we encounter with our scheduled water main, how do we want to address those going forward? We want to continue the present practice of essentially the village covering the cost of half of that service replacement. And then there's those emergency repairs. Somebody has a leak develop, and those are generally discovered when we see water running down the curb line. Usually they most often start as a small leak. It's not like a water main break, but we've got people that are trained to see, in dry conditions, if we've got water running down the curb line, if it's not an irrigation system, chances are it might be related to a water system leak. Then we have the ability to check whether it's on our main or trace it back to the service. So a leak on a lead service line with the Act now, in the past we would have notified the homeowner, you need to get a contractor out to repair the leak on your lead service line. We'd go through the same procedure and encourage, well, this would be an excellent opportunity for you to consider replacing your whole lead service line, but we didn't have any teeth to mandate that. Now we don't have a choice. The IEPA says if a lead service line is touched, it's a full replacement in this same timeline that we're talking about. So emergency repairs are going to take on a little different look, and we need to consider the board needs to consider. We need to consider as a staff what a cost sharing plan would look like with the village continue to extend, kind of using the scheduled water main improvement as a model. A 50-50 share of expense on that service line replacement. Most communities that are doing that are doing it with a cap. It's not unlimited, because that total cost can vary based on a number of factors, primarily where the water main is within the right-of-way relative to the house, if it's on the same side of the street, or on the opposite side of the street, or under the street. Those are all factors that have a cost implication. We estimate, I think we noted in the material here, somewhere between $10,000 and $16,000 for a full service replacement, today's dollars. And then there's the balance of those lead services that are not leaking, but those are existing services. We have to develop a plan. We call them here voluntary replacement, but they're all going to be subject to that same deadline out 19 years. And should there be a cost share opportunity for those property owners on a similar scale, 50% is something we throw around, 50% with a cap of X, $5,000 or whatever that is. And so that was kind of the starting point for conversation tonight. And then we sat down, staff has talked sat with our finance director and talked about some alternatives on what that financing might look like, and whether or not the village might even consider, in those cases where, because try as we might, it's hard to get people excited about a $10,000 to $18,000 investment in a utility service that it's not as interesting or as sexy as a new deck or a front porch, but it's a high priority. It's no different than sewer repairs. People have a hard time getting excited, understandably. So if they get thrust on them, particularly with a leak on one of these lead services, out of the blue, from one week to the next, they're looking at an expense of $10,000 to $18,000. Can and should the village consider potentially assisting with the fronting those costs as some kind of a zero or low interest loan we kicked around a couple of variables on what that might look like, but just wanted to kind of get some discussion, some feedback from the board on that. So that the takeaways from tonight, we want to, as we begin to build a policy that'll impact our budget preparations not only for this year, but as we look at the 10-year plan and the need to allocate some funding. And as we talked about last night at the Finance Committee meeting, how does that relate to our fee structure for next year and the following years to help to cover the cost of this? If we, quick math, with the remaining services, we could, even if aggressively we knocked out 25 services a year, if we had a cost-sharing model and we had a contribution of $5,000, we would need to be budgeting, $125,000 a year. So to start to put some teeth to it. So with that, I've got these two gentlemen with us tonight to help answer questions, at least either whether you have questions on the operational and how this is implemented, how we've made it work to date, and then we need some feedback on policy direction on how we want to frame this going forward.
Have we had a cap on the village contribution if it's not a leak situation, but it's, we're doing the main? And then, and then as a result, we're going to do the whole thing. Is there a cap then?
Well, no, but if we're doing the water main replacement, all we've done to date is we'll replace the service up to the B box, which is essentially the property owner, and that goes if the existing service is copper or if it's lead. If it's lead, as I said, we've strongly encouraged them to consider replacing the balance of it, but that's all on their dime. We've had no cap associated. We built into the budget of our water main replacements the last 20 years to do the 50% of the service as part of the water main improvement, if that makes sense.
Because we think that if we do our part of that, that's 50%.
Roughly, right. And it's just good practice. We don't want to go to all the effort of, we have to make a new tap. We replace the water main, we're tapping, we have to make a new tap into the new water main for the existing service. We don't want to leave old pipe within the right-of-way. Oftentimes it's under the pavement. So we, as a matter of practice, have put new copper in from the new water main up to the box, and that ensures us to some extent we've got the highest and best use of that service, at least within the right-of-way for future life of the main and the service.
And we view that as kind of paying for half, and so then in the other two situations you mentioned, we think to be consistent with that, we should also pay for that.
Well, we should consider a cost-sharing model.
Yeah, well, no, that seems,
Yeah.
and have we been paying for half sort of in the past?
On services that haven't been part of the main, no. We have, as we indicated back in May, we tried to incent by knocking any permit fees out, and we'll exempt a lead service replacement from any of our tapping fees, and that, I think we noted in here, that's $600 to $1,300 of fees that we normally would charge for a new service replacement.
So you can see the issue is just, I don't want people that were like the Good Samaritans who went ahead and did this, paid the full amount, and all of a sudden you come in later and you get a subsidy. On the other hand, 50% does seem, it seems kind of right. We all need to do this. There's a mandate, it's safer. So we have to balance that. Thoughts?
Yeah, I have real concerns about a percentage. Because a service line that runs under a driveway or takes out some favorite tree or fancy landscape or is a particularly large front yard is a very different cost than some other scenario. I would be in favor of some sort of upper limit or some fixed fee amount offset. because the price of replacing the service line varies quite a bit. And I don't want to manage to the exception, but there are a lot of scenarios that create variability in the replacement of a service line from the house back out. And it's like, it quickly gets a little muddy.
So let's ask Dave, are you, when you're talking about this, are you talking about the full restoration costs of whatever happens, or are we talking about the part that's, you know, the pipe, that type of thing?
I think, and we would model this, there are examples out there, other communities are having the same conversation. Winnetka, ironically, just this week, is considering a policy, a similar cost-sharing policy. And we have had in place on the sanitary sewer side, we've had a rebate program for 25 years with a 50% of the costs up to $2,000 for upgrades to the older gravity sanitary sewers. It's similar but not identical. Trustee Mulvaney is right. There is some variability on what that cost is. I would contend today, though, and Alex and Don help me, 90% of these service line replacements, contractors are using directional, horizontal directional boring methodology, which reduces, it doesn't eliminate, but reduces significantly the surface restoration needs. The other thing that has happened since we last talked to you in May is that and this is, we'll get into the code nerds here, but the code today requires for new construction that the water and sewer services have a 10-foot horizontal separation. These older services oftentimes were laid in the same trench with the water on top and the sanitary below it. And the IEPA has recognized the hardship that in this instance, mandating replacement and gaining, if you have to put an improvement in that creates this 10-foot horizontal separation, that's a significant change on where the service enters the basement, the foundation of the property, and oftentimes there can be significant additional plumbing costs internal to the house in that case. So they have granted an exception for the lead service line replacement program that the lead service line can be replaced in the same trench it's in, which is huge from a standpoint of reducing costs and manning. And it's safe. They wouldn't have approved the exception if it created any kind of a health and safety concern. It really doesn't.
But the point that Pete is making about a cab, I wasn't sure I felt about it, but particularly in light of the fact that for folks that get good Samaritans already, we may have to pay that much. The idea of the cab seems sort of big. I'm not sure what the number should be.
Yeah, I think I would just say we need to look at that a little bit from the standpoint of what's reasonable. The struggle is, of course, we're on the hook to make sure that this happens one way or another. And so I think we're going to have to be reasonable on what that cap might be. Understanding we're also talking about 2022 dollars, and we're probably going to have to look at this again in 2030, and after and before that to make sure that those numbers are still workable. Because these issues can also slow to a halt the public improvement projects. I've had conversations with some of our neighboring communities about how that has happened as well, as there have been a bit of back and forth that have gone on between the municipality and the homeowner. So I think what we'll come back when we bring that policy as part of the budget process, and we'll analyze a little bit further the necessity or where that top cap limit would be. But I agree. I think we want to make sure that there's a cap, and then we would just make that part of our annual review process to make sure that number makes sense.
We should look at what our neighbors are doing.
We are doing so, absolutely.
It'll be persuasive, more persuasive. If the homeowner says, I'm being screwed, it's more persuasive to say, well, actually, everybody's doing this. You wouldn't be better off in Winnetka or Northfield or whatever.
at the end of the day, it's a mandate that we're gonna have to work our way through, and that's another aspect of the discussion with the resident. And it doesn't make it any easier, to Dave's point. These aren't exciting upgrades, but it is something that everyone is uniformly subject to, which I guess is a good thing.
Having recently gone through this process, this is near and dear to my heart, but a $10,000 or $15,000 unexpected hit is alarming, I think, for some homeowners. I'd like to encourage staff to look at the loan program you've been investigating. That might be a way to soften the blow on that, even if it were just a relatively short term, especially if they can do it at what I'll call closer to a municipal rate rather than the private sector rate. One unexpected benefit for us is our water pressure increased, so my morning shower is much better now. So it's not not only the water quality, but it's also the quantity. Thank you very much.
One other thing, if there are any other behaviors we want to affect, whether we want to have this done quickly or slowly over a certain pace, thinking about what policies might help in doing that, whether it's incenting early or just thinking about, because it's a big project. There's 500.
Right.
And so trying to think a little outside of just the water main or lead line.
Mm-hmm.
So. Good point.
I think we covered it.
I think we have any, Alex or Don, anything to add?
The only thing I would add is a lot of the communities to our north and south, they're capping it at $5,000.
Okay.
That we know, yeah.
And that would be persuasive. Not necessarily determinative, but persuasive. Okay, thank you. So then, water meter antenna installation?
Yeah, and I'll kick this off, and I'm going to have Alex fill in a few blanks. As you know, we're in the final stages. Actually, we're down to a number of water meters we can count on one hand that have yet to be changed out with our village-wide meter replacement contract that was launched in 2020. Since we've completed it, we've noted that there are some meters on the east side of town, and this wasn't a real surprise to us, but we couldn't test it until we had all the meters replaced. We've got these meters they communicate to two antennas that went in part of the original contract. This map's a little small, but one, and they both went on existing village structures. One being the stack at the Public Works garage in the downtown, and the other on our elevated tank out on Frontage Road. And those antennas have worked extremely well, but what we have found is there's pockets of areas in East Glencoe where we have, where the ravines are, the topography is such that, and it's not surprising, those are the same areas of the village where we hear regularly of cellular service shortcomings. We've had trouble with some meters being read consistently on that east side. So we had a strong feeling that we would need to look at a third antenna even from the onset of the contract, but we took a wait and see. Well, now we're at the point that that's been confirmed. And so we began to scout out locations. We also were, with the aid and assistance of the drone technology, we were able to confirm how high is high enough to stay above the tree canopy. So we located a site at the south end of Longwood Avenue, which is, Longwood runs parallel to Sheridan Road, east of Sheridan Road. And it's at the end of a street end there, kind of in a grove of trees. And we have what's interesting about that location, we have an existing sanitary sewer lift station in proximity. That gives us the tie-in for electric and the Ethernet that we'll need to serve this antenna. The benefit of using the drone technology, we're able to reduce the height of what we originally thought might need to be a 100-foot antenna on pole with an antenna on top of it down to 70 foot, which is markedly different. So we're in the process of costing that out. We'll bring that contract for the installation and the mounting of that antenna to the board. We expect yet this calendar year. There are remaining funds in that original water meter contract to cover the cost of this, or so we believe at this point. So tonight we just want to make you aware of it, answer any questions. We have met, there's really only 2 properties that will even know it's there. And the water plant superintendent and I have met, personally met with each of the 2 of them. And that actually, we'll circle back, because when we met with them, we were talking about a 100-foot pole. It's now 70 foot. And while they, not surprisingly, they didn't welcome us. That we've been waiting all this time for an antenna at the end of our street. They were very understanding, and we assured them we would take steps to conceal the presence of this pole. By going with a 70-foot pole, we're looking to put a wood utility pole in that'll blend in. There's a grove of spruce trees there, and we believe will be fairly stealth in its location and serve our needs. We think, Alex, as of this afternoon, we're waiting on a preliminary cost estimate.
Preliminary costs, we're looking at about 25 to 30,000 for
Yeah, so it's
full installation.
considerably less than we were even initially anticipating. So just wanted to bring it to the board's attention tonight, make you aware of it, answer any questions you might have, and just when this comes down at you in the next month or 2, you won't be hearing it for the first time.
This sounds great, and the benefit of our little baby airplane.
So the people currently on the east side of town that you're not getting the concession, are they being undercharged at the present time or what?
Alex?
No, it has had no effect on utility billing. What it could affect down the road as we get ready to roll out the consumer portal, we won't have that, real-time data available. So it could affect conservation, notifying us of leaks or backflow occurrences. Yes.
So it's just missing, it said it collects 4 times a day, so let's say that it misses 3 of them, and then it collects those 3, the cumulative amount that it missed, on the next time it does connect, right? So that's why it doesn't miss the water billing. So,
To a certain extent, yes.
so as I was
But it
understanding,
does
if they had some kind of break, you'd miss that for those 3 misses, and that's the biggest challenge here that we could avoid, along with the data accuracy in the portal?
Correct.
Okay.
Just one other, you mentioned that cell service is not great over there. Can we put a cell tower right
Booster
on
antenna?
top?
The pole could support it, but that's.
Pay for the pole that way?
Well, the challenge with that, we're going to go in there with a stealth antenna, and we don't need any ground equipment. This will be an underground cable to a existing equipment structure that's, cell service requires, a ground lease and equipment that would add to that location.
There are, I would say, with cell service, some of the issues, and we've been talking about this, we've had a few residents on the east side reach out lately. It seems that the transition to 5G technology is taking a bit longer than expected for most of the major cell providers. They have an immense amount of authority now to essentially place the antennas anywhere they want to. So I have no doubt that they are eager to install. They don't necessarily need permission from us for
Don't we rent them this space? Don't they-
on the large monopoles, yeah, but they have the ability that these small repeaters have the ability to be placed on utility poles, and there is, I think, a supply chain issue. John has been taking a few of those phone calls. We've talked to AT&T somewhat recently on that issue, and I think some of that will get better, but there is no shortage of usage of data, and they are upgrading their systems more slowly than I think they had expected. So hopefully that will resolve, but I'm not sure that we're going to find a paying customer, if you will. I like the idea, though. we'll certainly let them if they want to.
Anybody else have any comments? That was helpful. I think we get it. So then the last item is the PFAS, which is a kind of forever chemical. Tell us about that.
I'm going to let Alex take the mic on that.
Thank you, Dave. So there still continues to be weekly news articles coming out on PFAS. Still no changes with the IEPA or the EPA on enforceable standards. Feedback from residents has been pretty minimal. We've been continuing to do our quarterly sampling. We had another sample just sent out this Monday, and we anticipate results in about 2 weeks. Again, the last 3 quarters have all been non-detectable, and we're continuing to monitor the situation.
So we're knocking on wood that it stays non-detectable, because that's good.
Correct.
But at some point, the environmental regulators are going to tell us we have to do something anyway.
Alex,
Most likely, yes.
do we have
Even
a
though
sense on
it
timeline?
remains non-detectable, we can probably say with certainty there is some trace amount in Lake Michigan without a doubt.
Alex, do we have a sense of the timeline for the EPA formally setting those standards? Have we been hearing from them on that?
I believe it will be in 2023.
Just around the corner. Anybody have questions on this? I mean, it's obviously coming, but we can't really do a ton about it until we see it arrive.
So I think I went out on a short rant a few months ago at one of our meetings about what we can do to limit your exposure to these chemicals. If anybody wants to recap, raise your hand and I'll do it again.
How short? How short? How short?
It's involved with things that make, for example, it could be in your carpeting to resist stains, or your car upholstery, your clothing that is, stain resistant. So if you want to avoid in fabrics, one easy thing is not buying the shirts that are advertising themselves as being stain resistant. Also cooking, some Teflon in your hot pan, so that gets into your food and you eat it. So if you can avoid cooking on Teflon at high temperatures, a good idea. So there are actually a wide range of simple things we can do to adjust our consumption behaviors, because after all, it's a lot easier to keep toxicity out than, once it's in the environment, to remove it.
So, maybe Glencoe could be in a position to alert our residents about a few pointers on how to stay safe in the interim? I mean, if it's
I was gonna say, people look at our social stuff. And
Well,
put it on
I would say
once a
we
month
certainly, I think there are a few components of this. These chemicals are everywhere in the environment. And I agree totally with Trustee Mulvaney that there are ways to limit individual additional exposure to them. I think the struggle with these forever chemicals is that they're showing up in water, but they're showing up in soils, they're showing up in the air. We're getting information relative to the fact that they're traveling around the world in precipitation. So the aspect of these chemicals is there is some known about risks. There's a lot that's unknown. When we look at it, part of why we want to keep bringing it back to the board is this is an aspect that once the EPA does perhaps set standards from the standpoint of water, there may be an impact to us in the treatment process. There may be a cost associated with that. I will say there's very little that the Village of Glencoe can do to limit forever chemicals in the environment, aside from, again, I agree with Trustee Mulvaney's points, how consumers are aware of them and the products that we purchase and use in our daily lives. So it's kind of a multi-tiered component. I think we can definitely share more information out. We can pull that together. But one of the important points that we just want to, again, continue to underscore with you is that when those EPA standards come out, we may have to make some decisions relative to our water treatment processes. We don't know what the time frame will be from that standpoint, but we will continue to keep monitoring that. But they are, and even understanding where the sources are coming from, whether there's no doubt there's industrial sources in terms of the drinking water, but we're not even sure whether those are point source, non-point source. There's just a lot that we're all learning as this information continues to come out, and the EPA continues to try to understand how best to provide guidance for regulatory and governmental agencies. So
like, what I take from this is there are two issues. One, which village manager just talked about, is that, you know, at some point we're going to have to adjust some of our village behavior and write some checks. And then, but the other one is, and that this stuff is everywhere, and, you know, it's there, and it's called a forever chemical for a reason. It's there. But the other one is, you know, sort of like, okay, there's lead, maybe, but that doesn't mean you want to be chewing on your lead paint. And Trustee Mulvaney's point is, okay, there's still some stuff we might be able to do individually, which would reduce the environmental exposure and would reduce our personal exposure, and that we ought to be advising our residents those things if they're straightforward, so they can do that. And that's not going to make the writing a check disappear, and it's not going to make the EPA disappear, but at least we'll be trying to protect our citizens and reduce our contribution to the problem.
Quick comment, to tagline, don't buy toxic stuff. That's why I should have answered your question. The other is, there are communities out there that are positioning, right now there's a lot of federal money coming into the water industry, and communities are positioning, in some cases, for treatment of PFAS, PFOS. So that may be something to consider. I know we've got a lot of water planning, thinking in the near future, but right now is a good time to be looking for federal money in the water space.
Dave's nodding. I hope we're doing that.
We're always looking for federal money.
Okay.
Well, and we are, and not to make light of it, I think part of what we also know is you have to have a project in order to get federal money. And so that's, I think, the next probably year or so, we're going to get much deeper again into the weeds on the water plant and the future of that facility and what we can and may want to do relative to that project. My hope is that with the EPA coming out with these standards, they also do so with a implementation timeline, again, similar to the lead service line replacements, and that with that comes some federal, ongoing and continuing federal assistance programs. Unfortunately, a lot of the water programs that we're still seeing from the feds are loans as opposed to grants. And loans are great when you have a very large project, and this may be a very large project down the road. So we will absolutely keep an eye very, very tightly focused on what our opportunities may be.
Anybody else? We've covered all three of the water topics on the agenda. Anybody else have anything on water? Okay, well, thank you, guys, for the excellent and helpful presentation. Is there any other business we should discuss before we take a break before our regular meeting?
3 cheers for Public Works. It was a good meeting.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded.